Awesome. So yeah, I'm here to talk about the ways we spy on seals. So some of the different methods that we use to do science for Hawaiian monk seals. So probably one of the first questions is, why are we spying on seals anyway? So as most of you probably know, Hawaiian monk seals are a pretty precious resource in Hawaii. They're endemic to Hawaii, meaning they only live here. They're endangered. They're actually one of the few mammals in our state and our state mammal. And in order to try to recover their population, we actually need to know quite a bit about their population. So kind of one of the first categories of things I'm going to talk about is understanding population trends. So is the population growing, shrinking, staying steady? Does it have enough, sort of reproductive animals in the population to help it grow? And so tonight I'm really going to be talking about sort of that reproductive potential in the population, because, it's one thing to go out and count the animals and see how many are there, but then it's also really important to us how many of those animals, how many of the adult females are reproducing, how many pups are we seeing, and sort of what's that potential, of new pups coming in to grow and recover the population. So that's one really important reason that we might want to do some spying on seals. Another sort of big category is biology and behavior. And so of course, that can encompass a whole ton of things. But especially for Hawaiian monk seals, one of the types of behavior we're really interested in is foraging behavior. So like what sort of food they're eating, how they're getting food, what kind of habitat they're using to get food. And this can be especially difficult to, sort of spy on them or get an idea of how they're foraging, because of course that happens underwater. So this is an area where we need to bring in some of those nifty new technologies. And so just to start out, we'll start with that, looking at population trends, and especially the role of reproduction in those trends. And so one of the first portions of our research that I want to share with you guys is some work that we did using citizen science. So I know a lot of people in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, citizen science. That's when great people like you guys that are concerned and interested in natural resources actually do something to share information with those of us at the agency that are trying to study and monitor those resources. So that's like the public calls we get, the volunteers, those sorts of avenues of getting information about monk seals. And so one of the things we did was we looked at the sightings histories that we get from whenever people call in sightings of seals to see if we could sort of detect what we think were some of these undetected or sort of missed pupping events. So like here, there's a mom and a pup kind of snuggled on the beach. That's really obvious. We definitely know that mom had that pup. But sometimes we come across a weaned pup and we have no idea where it was born or who the mom was. And so what we wanted to do was look through the sightings data that we have for these seals and try to do some detective work and see if we could sort of figure out what females might be having pups, maybe in more obscure locations that we're not noticing, and then use that to recalculate our reproductive rates to get a better idea of what the sort of reproductive potential is in the population. And so just to give a little bit of information, like why we need to depend on citizen scientists in the first place, why, us professional biologists aren't just out there answering all the questions. So as you guys know, Hawaiian monk seals exist across the Hawaiian archipelago, across a very large area. About 1,100 of them are in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, but about 300 are in the main Hawaiian Islands too. And the ways we study animals in these different places are quite different. So just to give some examples, so we could take an island in the Northwestern. So here's Laysan Island. And then, for example, Oahu, where we are here in the mains. And so I'm bringing these up. So Laysan over here is really hard to see because I intentionally left these at the same scale. So Laysan has about 5 miles of shoreline and about 225 seals. Oahu, meanwhile, is kind of almost the exact reverse of that. We've got about 250 miles of shoreline and just about 40 seals that show up on the island of Oahu. So you can imagine it might be a little easier to detect all the seals walking around Laysan than on Oahu. On Oahu, we've got to take a little bit different tactics. So in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, we send biologists up there. We establish seasonal camps. People stay for the summer. They're living on the island. They walk around. They literally walk around it every day and count all of the seals and identify all of the mom and pup pairs. In the main islands, it's a little bit different. We rely on seals showing up where people show up, and then those people reporting that to us. And thankfully, lots of you do, and a ton of people do. And so we actually get really fantastic data through this way in the main Hawaiian Islands. So we don't have to try to cover every single mile of coastline looking for that needle in a haystack of a seal. And so those sightings come in a number of different sources. So we've got organized volunteer groups. On Oahu here, we've got the Hawaii Marine Animal Response. On other islands, Kauai has a group through the DLNR. Big Island has a group through the Marine Mammal Center. So there's a lot of organized groups, but then there's a lot of also just dedicated folks that go out on their own time. Some people that I see here and do a lot of reporting among seals as well. And you guys are going to notice on all of these slides, there's this handy dandy number that you can also call and contribute to this amazing data set. Because we do actually also get calls from just folks in the general public, even tourists that might be here for a day and they see a monk seal and they think it's so cool that they figure out how in the world they can report it. And so people do find these public hotlines, which is fantastic. And so the sightings data that we get, it has increased over time, as of course monk seals have increased in the main islands a little bit over time. And so here in blue, you can see these are the sightings that we record, the NOAA biologists. And, you know, we've increased a little bit, but we're not doing too bad. But we kind of top out with the capacity of our staff. Luckily, in the red, we get some help from other agencies, like state agencies, other federal agencies that are managing land. But thankfully, we can also add to that the number of public sightings that we get. And as you can see, this has grown dramatically. The monk seal population has not grown this dramatically. It's just a lot of it is due to the awareness and just the growing enthusiasm and the growing care that people have for these seals and the reporting. And I do just have to throw in a shout out. This is the contribution that we get from just one super volunteer that was a part of this community. And so you can see the tremendous difference that one individual can make adding to a data set. But it also tells us we've got to cultivate that in a lot of people because we need a lot of people to make those contributions to keep that data set flowing. And of course, the sightings that we get vary by place. So you can see kind of the color code along the island chain. We get the majority of our sightings from Oahu and Kauai. And then here you can see a few in Molokai, Maui, and so on. And, you know, this is because there's a lot of people in Oahu. There's a lot of people to go to the beach and find some seals. And what we see is that the number of sightings we get doesn't always coincide with the number of seals that are around. So this pie chart shows the number of seals per island. And you can see we actually have a large portion of the population is on Niihau. But of course, since that's a privately owned island, not very many people get to it. We get this tiny little sliver of sightings. So kind of what happens on Niihau stays on Niihau. But these skews in the sightings are exactly the sorts of things that we're going to try to figure out with some detective work to see what's going on with seals when we're not directly seeing them. And so, of course, with all of this, the sightings and the amount of data can vary dramatically from seal to seal. So a lot of you may have seen this seal. This is Rocky, who likes to hang out in very popular beaches. And so any number of these people might have called in a sighting for Rocky that day. On the other hand, this seal that hangs out on Molokai is much less likely to be seen. And so all of these dots on this graph are sightings. And so you can see we get many fewer for the animals on Molokai. So this is what we're going to try to do with these sightings plots. So just to give you a little familiarity, every little shape is a sighting, different shapes for different islands, but you can mostly ignore those. Red is where animals are nursing. So that indicates that a female was seen with a pup nursing. And then where you see these little gray lines, that's where we didn't see a female for a long enough period that she could have nursed a pup. We know that the average nursing period for moms and pups is about 40 days. So if we put a line in there to show anytime there was a gap in the sightings of at least 35 days. So we're like, she could have nursed a pup in that period of time, and we could have missed it. And then the blue is molting. So whenever seals are seen molting, where they have this shaggy, shedding their fur appearance. And then also these little lines in front of the molting, that stands for the normal period of time from when a mom weans a pup to when she typically molts. So if you think about it, this little gap here where we have, that would have been enough time to wean a pup. That's about the amount of time we would expect from weaning a pup until molting. We can start to be a little bit suspicious about this gap. And then one of the other things that we know about monk seals and their reproductive cycles is the overall cycle takes about 380 or 390 days. So it's a little bit more than a year. So if a mom has a pup year after year, we actually expect things to shift later and later in the year with subsequent years. So what we do with all of this is we can look at these sightings histories and we can identify breeding seasons where that mom definitely had a pup. We saw her nursing it. So that's definitely a pup. And then we can see years where we can definitely rule it out. Like we didn't see her with a pup this year, but we saw her almost every day. We know she didn't have one. But then we get these suspicious ones where we have a very conveniently sized gap in sightings, conveniently placed before molting. And we also see this little staggered pattern in the molt. So we really think that this suggests that she had a pup that year. We just didn't see it. She may have picked a more secluded beach than normal. And so you can see that can actually happen a number of times in a female's history. And then, of course, some years, if we saw her 2 times in the year, we have no idea what happened that year. That's just insufficient data. So we looked at these for 79 females. So that's basically all of the females that have been of reproductive age since we've been monitoring in the main islands. And so that added up to a total of 491 reproductive seasons. And so you can see, so we have some animals like Rocky, who hangs out in really popular spots. And we know we had such rich sightings on her that we know we never missed one of Rocky's pups. But then you've got RK28, KC, and there were some pups that showed up in places that we saw. And then there were also a number of gaps that we thought were highly likely to be missed pups. And then you have one like R303, who we never actually saw her have a pup, but based on the gaps in her sightings and based on this really nice clear stagger pattern in her molt data, we can actually infer that she has probably had 4 pups. That we don't know where she had them, but now we know a lot more about her reproductive history because we can, it's kind of like the data that we have helps us figure out the data that we don't have. So it's a really cool contribution of all of these sightings, and especially when we get little extra bits of data like whether the animal was molting. And so overall, we identified 25 missed pupping events, and so we could add those into our reproductive histories. We had 132 where there wasn't quite enough data to confirm or deny, so they were maybe missed pups, and so we came up with a probabilistic equation to add some of those back in. And then we recalculated our reproductive curves. So this dotted line is what we used to measure and say this is the reproductive rate for females at any given age. And now the red line is what we can say after adding in all of the pups that we were missing before. So you can see our estimate of reproductive rates actually jumps up quite a bit, and we're even able to estimate what the reproductive rates might be for some of the older animals, and even older than, well, it actually goes out older than we expect animals to be, but some of that's just equations. But so we've got a much nicer looking reproductive rate curve for these animals, which gives us a much more favorable idea for the reproductive potential and the potential to recover this population. So that's really encouraging. And really, it all comes from people reporting sightings of seals. So again, there's the number. Hopefully everyone either has it or writes it down. But it's like this project was just a really cool example of how much difference and how much contribution it makes to have all of the sort of citizen science information coming in from so many different sources. And one of the things we learned was especially that molt data was really valuable because that helped us sort of pinpoint where an animal is in her cycle every year. Even if we didn't see, nursing, we didn't see pupping, but if we have molting, we can sort of backtrack where some of the rest of that cycle might have been. And so for an agency, that tells us now we can go and work with, volunteers and seal watchers and kind of offer some more information on what to look for and how to get some of that extra rich data. So, and kind of switching gears a little bit, so kind of the second part of the talk. So now we already talked about, what's going on land when seals are up on land and nursing their pups and having pups. But then the other part that I want to talk about is sort of the underwater lives of seals and how we can spy on them when they're, not within our view at all and see what they're doing underwater. And so some of the main questions that we want to look at sort of in this realm are understanding the habitat use and foraging behaviors of animals. So where they're getting food, what types of food they're targeting, how deep they're diving, that kind of thing. And then also linking that foraging ecology with different threats and survival. Because of course, how a seal is eating is how it's making its living and might have a lot to do with how, what's going right and what's going wrong in the population. So just to think about a couple of the threats that seals face that we can try to think about with this research. One, of course, is fisheries interactions. We see a lot of seals with fish hooks, sometimes stuck in a cheek, sometimes actually swallowed, and that can be really, really harmful. And that's another great thing that we get reported, and then we can actually go and help animals and try to remove fish hooks. But one of the other things we would like to understand is sort of more what's happening with these animals that they're encountering fish hooks, and where are the seals going, how deep are they diving, what types of prey are they likely to encounter, and how many fishermen are they likely to encounter. So one of the things we do is we put transmitters and instruments on seals when we have them in hand and we're, say, removing a hook from an animal, especially with a surgery. Then we like to give them a little tag when we send them out. And I did bring some show and tell. I forgot to unwrap them. Sorry, folks online. I have some nifty instruments to show everyone in person. But so this is we call it a cell phone tag because this antenna actually transmits through the cell phone network. So only useful in the main islands, right? We don't have cell phones in the Northwesterns. But this actually records really precise locations with a GPS and also depth of diving. So this is one like we put on RF-28 after we dehooked him on Kauai. So there he is heading back to the water. And then this, so you can see this start point. And then we tracked him kind of back and forth all along the coast of Kauai. And then we also get these nice little diagrams that show the depth that he was diving to. So we see the dive depths, and we can tell whether it's day or night. And we see his maximum was about 40 meters or 130 feet. And then we can see when they're hauled out as well. So that's a really great way to track their behavior and see what they're doing and try to start learning a little bit more about how they're encountering so much fishing gear in their daily routine. And then one of the other big threats that we're concerned about is food limitation. This is mainly with juvenile animals in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. Some of them simply don't get enough to eat, and then they're sort of failing to thrive. They can be very thin. And, after the years that we've had in these field camps, we can say with pretty high certainty, thin seals don't survive. And so one of the things that we've been doing with that is bringing them down to the rehab facility that's in Kona, the Keikaiola Marine Mammal Hospital. And then, of course, we've got to take them back. And when we have put in all this investment to rehab an animal and we're taking them back, we want to be able to track their survival and track how they're doing once we put them back. So if you see this is one of the juveniles after it's nice and fat and happy and going back home to Lisiansky Island. And you can see this little device on its back. So that is a little smaller, simpler satellite tag that we put on animals. So this is this little small satellite tag. And so that one basically is just tracking location, and all of these little circles you see around Lisiansky, those were this animal's movements on a week-by-week basis. So we could kind of see from week to week, is it starting to, you know, sort of develop a home range, get an idea for like a sort of feeding territory, or is it, you know, going clear out to sea and getting really confused? So this animal did a good job and figured out some good foraging spots around Lisiansky Island. And of course, just in general, we really want to just understand more about what seals are doing underwater and how they're foraging. And so one of the big ways that we do that is by attaching these seal cameras. And I have one of those as well. So yeah, so this is the seal cam, and you guys are welcome to come and pick these up afterwards. But it's a little bit heavier because it's got a lot going on inside. It's got a camera in here, as well as a GPS, as well as a depth sensor, so we can get a really good idea for what animals are doing and where they're doing it. So that's been a really great data stream that we've been able to use to really figure out, especially, you know, combating some of the misperceptions, figuring out how much monk seals are eating, what fish they're targeting, so that we can say, you know, not just from our mouths, but show people like, no, they're not just eating everything under there. They're, you know, either really selective or sometimes really slow at finding things. And so this is just a couple of pictures of us putting one on. So this is one of the cameras. It's got a little different footing there. But so we basically just glue it onto the fur with epoxy. And so you can see here's one of our seals just sort of resting. He's got the camera on his back, and there's a little satellite tag behind it. And then, of course, the tricky part of putting a camera out on a seal is then you have to get the camera back from the seal. And usually it makes us really, really happy when we get one. Because then, of course, we get really fantastic information. And so I've got a couple of videos to share with you guys. So these first ones are a couple of videos from some seals that we instrumented at French Frigate Shoals this summer during our field camps. So this first one is an adult male that we got at Turn Island. You can see there, he really just hung out around Turn Island. Those are his location points. And so maybe now you can see why he's hanging out at Turn Island. There's lots of other seals. So here he is interacting with a young female seal. And then there he is trying to wreck my camera.
Did he make the spots on the lens?
The lens had a little lens cap to try to protect it from scratches, but then air bubbles get all up under the lens cap. So pro and con. And then the second guy that we instrumented up at French Frigate Shoals was this juvenile. I think he was a 2-year-old, I believe. And so you can see that camera looks a lot bigger on him than the other guy. But this little guy swam all the way out to Brooksbanks, which was over 40 miles. Brooksbanks are about 200 feet deep. So he is doing some really, you know, some far traveling and some really deep diving. And I just want to let you know, this is not on fast forward. He is just much, much zippier than the other guy. You know, I'm sure especially you guys with kids know the young ones seem to run really, really fast. You can see he's kind of taking off chasing some little fish. And yeah, so often what they'll do is they might chase a fish, but they usually like chase it into some little coral puka, and then he's digging in there to try to get it. It's really hard usually to tell whether or not he actually gets it, unless it's a fish that's so big that they bring it up to the surface. One of the other really cool things about these cameras is they do actually have LEDs for night vision. So this is the same seal, but foraging at night. I think this video was around 3 in the morning. So yeah, so they don't stop. So now you can see when you guys see seals hauled up on the beach and they're stacked out sleeping, you know, it might be because they've been up diving to 200 feet depths to try to find food at 3 in the morning. And this was just a really nice, yeah, there's some.
Is this the same seal?
This is the same seal, yep. Same seal, this one's during the daytime. Going through a really pretty place up at Brooks Banks. Yeah, and then this is also a little seal-eyed view of the Hanauma National Marine Monument that you guys might have to get to see as well. So those were some of the fun shots from our adventures at French Frigate Shoals this summer. We also did a couple of instrumentations on Molokai. So we did 2 seals on Molokai. One was a subadult and one was a juvenile. This is the subadult. I didn't have a good picture of the juvenile on land. And so this is the juvenile, and he's going to go on a mad chase. If you look really, there's a tiny white dot sometimes that's a fish that he's chasing. So you can attempt to keep track of that.
What's the biggest fish that they've been known to eat?
We get some images of them getting pretty big ones. Like, I think, I don't want to totally spoiler it. So I think right there, I think he did get that fish. A little hard to tell, but I'm on his side, so I think he did. And so little fish like that, they can just slurp up as they're going, but sometimes they get like really big fish, and then we'll see them like drag it to the surface and spend 5 minutes chomping on it. Yeah, I don't have a good like actual weight measurement or anything. All right, and then this one is our subadult male, and he's also foraging and finds a tempting little treat that is not so good for him. So, I don't know, I don't know what it is. It's some plasticky something, and we program these videos so that we get like a 30-minute chunk of video, and then it'll stop recording for a few hours so that we don't just burn all the video on one thing. So I watched this seal spend 30 minutes messing with this plastic thing. Like, I don't know if it was fun. I don't know if he thought there was a fish under it. I really don't know, but he would, you know, he'd spend several minutes at it and then go up, get a breath, and then you would see him circle right back down to the same exact spot and continue messing around with this plastic thing.
How does he remember what spot he went down?
You know, they must have really good memories because they remember what spots they like to go sleep. They remember what spots they were trying to get an eel out of a rock. They're pretty good at it. Well, so that is all I have for you guys, and I just wanted to say a big thank you. Thank you all for coming out, and a huge thank you for and just a huge thanks to all of the volunteers and the different organizations that help us to get the data that we get and to help us track down seals when we want to get cameras back from them and all that good stuff. I think you were first, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you had done, you know, you'd shown us the females and that population of breeding animals.
Yeah.
What about males?
Oh, what about males? We never know. Breeding happens at sea, and we have no idea who the baby daddies are. But I'm really excited. We just started a new genetic collaboration with a lab, and so hopefully we We've done some attempts before. Monk seals, because the populations have been so small for so long, there's not a ton of genetic diversity. It can be kind of hard to tell who's related. But genetic technology keeps going gangbusters forward. So we're going to try again with a different, some different techniques for looking at much more of the genetic sequence. And so I'm really hopeful that we can try to figure out some of that, because yeah, we're really interested in looking at, we see, you know, behaviorally some dominance in different males, but does that match up with paternity? We don't know, but hopefully we'll find out.
One other question.
Yeah.
The aquarium had the 2 males.
Yeah.
And one time I asked, why didn't they use their genetic material to add to the population? I mean, you know, they're males. Why not? And they said they can't.
We do not have enough worked out to really even know how to safely breed monk seals in captivity. So yeah, that would get having males in the population to breed and then being able to safely do it in a captive environment are really different things. And maybe as the population goes down, we could get there, but we're definitely not there currently. So that's a great question. Yeah.
When you attach those cameras to their back and they are rolling and doing this kind of thing, do they dislodge them?
They can. We try to make sure they don't. So like what we have with this one is it gets glued. So we have like this little mesh that we squish all the glue into on the fur. And then this little cover actually goes over it. So it like wires the camera to the mesh. So hopefully this adds a little extra layer of protection. And then that's also how we get it off. So then we just have to clip a couple of wires and then we pull it off when we get back to them. But
When they molt, do they just come off it?
yes, they do. So we always try to instrument animals that are quite a ways from molting, because of course we don't want to lose an instrument that way. And it's also physiologically stressful for the animals closer to molt. But then, so like we'll get our camera back and we'll end up leaving this little mesh piece with a bunch of glue on it stuck in the fur. And then that'll just come off the next time the animal molts. So I think, let's see, was it RK40, the one that we just did on the North Shore? It was RK. RG40. Yes, thank you, ladies. I knew someone would have the correct numbers. But yeah, so if anyone's seen that seal this year, he went through that. So we did instrument him with a camera on Oahu, and then we got our camera back, and then he eventually molted that patch off.
How many cameras are you losing?
None recently. Yeah, right. We went through, we did go through a couple in kind of an R&D phase where we didn't get a couple back, but actually we just lost 2. And then in that process, you know, every time figured out, retooled our attachment and our little protection mechanisms. And so we've been having pretty good luck with getting them back lately. Yeah.
Yeah, so is there any place where we can view these seal cams?
There are a couple posted online through NOAA's websites. I think if you Google monk seal field notes, because it was part of some of the stuff we were putting out about our field season this year. So we've got a couple of them online, and we're trying to get a few more edited into like nice little packages that we can send out. And then we're also going to be working with schools to have students actually, you know, doing the data collection from these videos, like how many fish did they pass, you know, that kind of thing. So yes, so some of your kids potentially will get to have the, we'll just call it a scientific experience of watching hours and hours of footage while taking careful notes. But as far as publicly, we are going to try to get more of them kind of edited into some nice videos. Yeah.
Do you try to recover all of them, like including the little satellite trackers too?
The little satellite trackers, no. For a couple of reasons, they're smaller and cheaper. So it hurts less to lose them for us. But also because it's smaller, it doesn't really, it's not as much of a noticeable, you know, drag or anything on the seal. And also because they're a simpler technology, they they last much longer. So the batteries on these can transmit for up to like 6 months. So generally we'll put these on and we hope to just get as long a data stream as we can until it gets molted off. And then occasionally someone finds one and we get it back, but generally they're lost at sea.
Oh, so there's no like little device on there that sends a little signal saying, I'm here and come get me. Like the kind that, you know, like when you tag like whales and sharks, the little thing floats up and then sends a little.
These don't have a floater thing. You could ping them if they were still getting wet to get turned on, but they turn off when they're out of salt water. So yeah, and seals never lose things in convenient places. So did you have a question? Yeah.
Have seals ever broke your instruments?
Yes, they do. We don't think it's very nice of them, but they sure do. In fact, I think, this one, if you come look at it, the lens is scratched up pretty well from when they, ram into some coral here and there. But then you can see the outside of this plastic thing. I mean, it was, nice, slick plastic, but it's nice and scratched up. So yeah, they do their best to destroy everything we put on them. Yeah.
Why do they molt?
Well, have you ever, let's look at our picture of our molting guy. So you can kind of see here where he's like kind of green and gross looking. So seals spend a lot of time in the water. So their fur gets kind of all covered in algae and stuff, like if you never washed your swim flippers or something. And so then every year they shed that kind of old gross fur, and it's just like if you get sunburned and peel off. And so that skin and fur peels off, and then they have some nice clean fur underneath.
They're using molting sequence as an indicator of birthing.
Yeah, it's kind of the combination of the molting sequence and when they're missing.
What happens if they don't pup?
If they don't pup, let's see. So, like here, this is a nice one since we have a really thick, good data stream. So here, if they don't pup, then their molting gets sort of set back. Yeah, because so the like in general, so like for males, for instance, that don't go through pupping, they generally molt about once a year. So you can imagine females would also molt about once a year if that weren't interrupted by the whole cycle of being pregnant and then nursing and all of that. So in years where they don't pup, the molting ends up being a little earlier than it was the year before.
So when if they're pregnant, you definitely will not.
If a female is molting while pregnant, that's not a good sign. Yeah, they shouldn't. I feel like some folks in here know Brenda Becker, kind of our keeper of all monk seal trivia. I'm sure Brenda would say this one time in 1987 on like Lizzie Anstey. Probably it has happened once, but that seal would have been in bad shape. But yeah, normally, obviously pregnancy is really physiologically taxing. Molting is also really physiologically taxing. So that's actually why you see this gap after an animal nurses her pup. She's usually pretty emaciated and she is not in good body condition to deal with any more stress. So it takes them this period of time to sort of get back up into good condition before their body can really support molting. And so that's kind of why we see that gap. Yeah.
You mentioned the starving in the Northwest Islands. I would think there'd be a ton of fish out there, and how could they starve?
There are a ton of fish. And one of the things that we think is there are also a ton of other predators. So there's a lot of sharks, there's a lot of big alua, and that's one of the things that we've been, one of the things we're using this video data for is in the videos we can see how often the seal is encountering a shark or an alua, especially while it's trying to get food. And just kind of anecdotally, the rate that we see those other predators sort of competing for food is much, much higher in the Northwest Islands.
The type of ulua that would be a danger to the monk seals, you're talking about the great, the big, what do you call it?
Yeah, like the giant trevallies,
I saw one yesterday. It was giant.
Yeah.
And came to visit the Ulua school that was.
Uh-huh.
And I got it on videotape.
Oh, nice.
And then it just sort of slowly went away into the deep,
Yeah.
you know, not to be seen again from, I've never seen one quite
Yeah.
that size. I
Yeah.
don't know how to say it, but it was bigger than between this
Oh,
one
wow.
and me, and massive,
Yeah.
obviously big body weight.
Yeah.
So it was like.
Yeah,
oh,
and
that's
even
bigger.
if they're not that big, because it's not necessarily that they're preying on monk seals, but they're just they're kind of like the bullies at the schoolyard. So like, because monk seals are so, have such a good specialty for sort of finding food along the bottom that maybe sharks or alua aren't necessarily going to find. So they wait for the monk seals to find it, and then they sort of harass the monk seal to try to steal their lunch. So, yeah.
That sort of jives with some comments that I've heard of an acquaintance of mine that had died out there looking for algae as the alua were coming and taking stuff right from her hand.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they were just stalking her.
Yeah.
And if she was a monk seal getting stuff, they're stealing the stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the reasons we especially see that that sort of food limitation problem in juvenile seals. Like by the time they're an adult, they've probably figured out how to fend off the bullies or, where to forage, that they're not going to get as many other animals coming after their food. But for the young ones that are just figuring it out, you can imagine that, that sort of stalking can be really intimidating, and they're likely to be less successful. Yeah.
That was also true of some sharks coming in and doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a lot of divers say alua can be pretty bullish.
Am I
Yeah.
supposed to be worried when I go snorkeling through the school of the big eye trevally? Oh, Ulua, big eye trevally, same thing. I mean, are they ever going to attack me? They seem to like me. They actually, when they spot me, they come towards me and they start circling around me. So they know my swim trunks, they know me.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I'm not a fish biologist, but I've heard a lot of divers say they've gotten like charged by them, or they'll like headbutt them, but I've never heard of them like,
They swim
attacking.
right,
Yeah.
They know me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did
Did you have a question too?
Yeah, one last one.
Yeah.
With the video, you get real species specific as to what their diet is amongst it.
I wish we could get better. A lot of times it's, you see the head, it's a thing in coral, and you see them like lunge at something and chomp on something, and the head was in the way, and you can't really tell what it was. Sometimes we can tell, a lot of times we can't. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask, do you have an opinion on why Hanauma Bay has been visited so frequently with 1 to 3 monk seals all summer? We never had that before.
They got in the habit. I don't know. They find a good place. They hang out there pretty routinely, and then some.
Fast, right?
Yeah, and then sometimes routines change. So wherever they were hanging out before, routine changed, and now they're here and could be moving on soon. Yeah.
Have you tagged any that have came here?
To Hanauma? Not with the video stuff, but we definitely have put flipper tags on them. Yeah.
So we see monk seals at kind of point every so often.
Yeah.
But we can't always see any markings that might indicate what seals there are.
Mhm.
Do you have any other tips on a database that's a way that I can identify them?
Oh, like a photo database. Well, so we do have a photo database at NOAA. It's not like publicly available online. That would be awesome if it was. I don't think we have the capacity to host it. Yeah, it's not online. It's pretty big and unruly at the moment. But I can say if you send a photo in, there's also on our website, we've got an email address. I think it is Seal Sightings.
Oh, it's monk seal sighting.
I think, it's the Sightings email. I'm butchering it at the moment, but if you search our website, it's very obvious in the Googles. But so if you email a photo, you may not be able to figure it out right then, but that's one of the great things about taking a photo. You can call in and say, oh, I saw a seal. I have no idea who it is. Here's a photo. And then a couple of our folks at the office might recognize it right offhand, or can try to compare with the photo database.
Parts of the seal better, I mean, obviously I'm only able to take a photo of trying to stay far enough.
Yeah.
Not disturb anything, but are there any parts of the seal that, that are more, that make identification easier?
It's a great question, and it kind of depends on the seal. Flippers are great because even if it doesn't have flipper tags, then we know it's one of the ones we haven't tagged. But depending on the seal, some have scars or little bleach marks in different places. There is one big male that hangs out at Kayana Point all the time that has like this big round cookie cutter scar right in the middle of his back. So like, you know, so basically if you see anything that looks like some sort of marking, probably we have a record of that, and that's a really good thing to capture.
What about Malama Monk seal?
There is an Instagram account, Malama Monk Seal, which actually, yeah, if you wanted something more instant, I bet if you posted something on Instagram and tag Malama Monk Seal, he is he is a monk seal geek that shall not be named, but he will just out of sheer obsession probably message you back, letting you know what seal it is right away. Oh, do you have the email?
I have the, if you want the.
Oh, cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Do you have one more question for me?
Which flippers do you like if you want to photograph the flippers? Which flippers do you do?
The back ones. Yeah. Yep. Because so they kind of fan out, and so it's in between, like the little webbing in between, like their toes.
They always have two identical tags.
We try to give them two tags, and they're not quite identical. It's usually like it might be K80 and K81. And so that way we can also tell, like, if someone, you know, reads us one or the other, we know that's the right or the left or whatnot. Yeah.
Could you and have you considered putting the camera on its chest so that you can see what it was eating, or would it knock it off a lot more easily?
I feel like that would get in the way more, or they would notice it more and they could like mess with it. I don't know.
Oh, because they're reach that.
Yeah. I don't know if they would be able to peel off the epoxy. I mean, the epoxy is pretty solid, but I think that they would, well, and also they would probably lay, I don't know, they lay on their backs too, but I feel like they would lay on it and mess with it more.
But maybe less scraping it off on the coral underwater.
Oh no, they're still gonna scrape it. Monk seals, like they find a thing in a puka and they're just gonna like squish their body into it. So like all parts of their body are gonna get scraped with coral. We just notice on the back because that's where we put stuff.
And they haul out on rocks, so that's
Yeah.
real good. for
That's true. Yeah, every time they're hauling out, they would be scraping their belly. All right.